Today was the formal sentencing of Shantieri Weems, which I know is a case a lot of you have been waiting for. But first, let's go over a summary of what happened. Shantieri was an owner of a daycare in Owings Mills, Maryland. She's married to a man named James Weems, who is a retired police officer and ex-Marine. At the time of this incident, he was working at her daycare as a bus driver, and he also did security on the side. In the beginning of July of 2022, a parent said that James essayed her child, so she called the police, and it caused the daycare to shut down while the investigation was ongoing. And not too long after that, another parent came forward and told Shantieri that James essayed her child as well. So she drove to a hotel in DC where James was doing a security job at to confront him. Shantieri said that once they were in the room and she was confronting him, he started to walk towards her in a threatening manner, so she shot him in the neck, and then once he was on the ground, she shot him again in the leg, shattering his femur. Before Shantieri was arrested, she wrote in a journal that was recovered at the scene that said that she didn't intend on killing James. Instead, she wanted to paralyze him so that way he couldn't hurt another child again. In total, James received over 30 charges against children, including rape, essay, and assault, and his trial begins on May 22nd. Now for Shantieri, she was arrested and charged with aggravated assault while armed, carrying a firearm without a license, possession of a firearm during a crime of violence, and resisting arrest. She was offered a plea deal and accepted it in November, where she pled guilty to the aggravated assault as well as carrying the firearm without a license. Following that, the prosecutor recommended a 2-year jail sentence followed by 3 years of probation. However, that's not the sentence that Shantieri received. The judge called that recommendation too lenient and said that she acted with deliberate cruelty and inflicted life-altering injuries to James. So he sentenced her to 4 years in jail followed by 2 years of supervision. He gave her 48 months for the assault charge and 20 months for the firearms charge, but did say that they would be ran concurrently. When this sentence was read out, friends, family, and supporters that were in the courtroom were outraged. After her sentencing, Shantieri gave an emotional statement saying, quote, "I was supposed to protect those children. My husband was supposed to help me protect those kids. I bear so much guilt because the person I chose to love and trust turned out to be the one the kids needed protecting from." Shantieri's lawyer said that they're looking into the possibility of appeals, and he also said that Shantieri was expecting to get released today, which is what I know a lot of us were hoping for.
This is a disturbing case of the Slenderman stabbing. On the morning of the 31st of May 2014, a man on a bike ride in Wisconsin made a shocking discovery. A 12-year-old girl, Peyton Leutner, was lying on the grass covered in blood. The day prior, the young girl had been at a sleepover with some of her friends. She hadn't realised that the sleepover had been a trick to lure her into the woods to murder her. 2 years before what the media dubbed the Slenderman stabbing, Peyton had met her friend Morgan at school. The pair had become friends when Peyton noticed her sitting alone in the cafeteria and felt sorry for her. The two became close, and then they made another friend, Anissa Weir. Anissa, on the left here, was described as a cruel girl. She seemed really jealous of the friendship between Peyton and Morgan. As their friendship grew, Anissa and Morgan became obsessed with the internet meme Slenderman. Slenderman was a tall, faceless man with long arms who turned viral when people would Photoshop him into creepy images. The mythical man would prey on young children and lure them into the woods to kill people. Shockingly, around December 2013, Morgan and Anissa concocted a plan to kill someone in order to show their dedication to the fictional Slenderman. Their plan was to invite Peyton to Morgan's birthday to get her alone, and then lure her into the woods and kill her. Morgan actually described this as a flawless plan. As the girls started their walk to the woods, Morgan snuck a knife from her kitchen into her waistband. They then completely blindsided poor Peyton. Morgan jumped on top of her and started stabbing her. The two perpetrators then run off, claiming that they were going to go and get help. The young girl was left to struggle on her own and crawl towards the road to get help. When the cyclist discovered her, an ambulance arrived and nurses noted that she had 19 stab wounds. She had 6 hours of intensive surgery but miraculously survived. The girls were charged with attempted first-degree intentional homicide. Now, the jury actually found Morgan not criminally responsible due to schizophrenia. She was sentenced to 40 years in a mental health institution. Anissa had apparently experienced shared psychotic disorder and was sentenced to 25 years in a mental health institution. This case will put you off ever talking to anyone online. This male stabbed his girlfriend over 90 times and then FaceTimed his sister to show her the dead body. Ashley Wadsworth was a 19-year-old girl who met Jack Seppel on Facebook in 2015. She was roughly 11 or 12 at the time, and Jack was around 15 or 16. They spent the following years continuously sharing messages and chatting online about their lives. Now, Ashley was from Canada and Jack was from Essex in the UK. Jack treated her really nicely to begin with, talking to her all the time and showering her with gifts and attention. When Ashley turned 16, the relationship between the two began to develop. Ashley would ask her parents often if she could go to the UK to travel to meet Jack. At first, they were obviously against this, seeing as Jack lived abroad and the two had never met. However, in 2021, Ashley had graduated high school and saved up to make the trip to meet Jack. Jack actually reassured Ashley's family that he would guard her with his life. Little did they know, she wouldn't actually need protecting from anyone other than him. In November 2021, the pair met for the first time. They went sightseeing around London and Ashley documented this on her social media. However, things began to take a turn over the next couple of months. Jack started controlling Ashley. He demanded her social media passwords and made her delete photos without him in them. He also became physically abusive towards her. She was covered in bruises from Jack, and in one altercation, he smashed a glass over her head. The young girl tried to reach out for help from her friends, but it was clear she was scared of Jack. Bearing in mind Jack had access to all of her social media, she sent a message to one of her friends one day warning, "Be careful what you say, he's watching," and she then unsent the message to prevent him seeing it. On the 1st of February 2022, Ashley turned up to Jack's mum's flat barefoot. She had run there, she was crying and hysterical. She said Jack had smashed her phone, beat her up and cut her hand. Now, following this incident, her parents actually booked her a flight home. She was relieved by this and returned to Jack's flat to wait to go home. Now that day, bearing in mind this is now obviously nighttime in Canada, Ashley's sister received a text begging her to wake up and answer the phone. When she eventually got this message, she tried to ring Ashley back and got no reply. At this point, Jack's mum tried to go round to Jack's house and get in. She wasn't able to do so and the police were eventually called. When officers arrived, Jack wouldn't open the door, so they forced entry. They found an absolutely hideous scene. Jack was lying next to Ashley's dead body in a pool of blood. Jack was casually on FaceTime to his sister, showing her the dead body. He admitted to strangling her and stabbing her. Jack was sentenced to life with a minimum of 23.5 years.
This girl was victim to the most disturbing crime in American history, an evil woman who was meant to keep her safe. Her children and even children from the neighborhood all teamed up to do the worst and most disgusting things imaginable to this innocent girl for 3 months straight before she eventually died on a filthy mattress, having suffered over 150 different wounds plus starvation in a cold and dirty basement that became her prison. I warn you now, this case requires a strong stomach because this is honestly the most disturbing case I have ever covered. Sylvia Marie Likens was born on January 3, 1949 in Indiana and was the third of 5 children born to carnival workers Lester Cecil Likens and his wife, Elizabeth Betty Francis. Her siblings were 2 sets of twins. Daniel and Diana were 2 years older than her, and then Benny and Jenny were a year younger. Her little sister Jenny suffered from polio, causing one of her legs to be a lot weaker than the other one, requiring her to always wear a metal leg brace. Lester and Elizabeth had a rocky marriage and were frequently on the move, often selling candy, beer, and soda at carnival stands around the state during the summer. The Likens sons would often travel with them to help with their business, but Sylvia and Jenny were discouraged from doing the same due to concerns for their safety and education. As a result, the sisters would often stay with their relatives, particularly their grandmother. As a teenager, Sylvia would earn money for herself by babysitting, running errands, or doing ironing for friends and neighbors. She was described as a friendly, confident, and lively girl with long, wavy, light brown hair and was known as Cookie to her friends. Despite her exuberant personality, Sylvia had a missing front tooth which she had lost while playing with her brothers as a child. She was also fond of music, particularly the Beatles, and was very protective of her younger sister, Jenny, who was more timid and insecure than her older sister. The sisters would often visit a local skating rink, where Sylvia would help Jenny skate by holding her hand. In June 1965, the Likens family, consisting of Sylvia, Jenny and their parents, resided in Indianapolis. However, on July 3rd, their mother was arrested and jailed for shoplifting. In light of this, their father, Lester, arranged for his daughters to stay with a local woman, Gertrude Banaszewski, the mother of 2 girls, Paula and Stephanie, whom the sisters had recently met while attending Arsenal Technical High School, and became friends. Their mother Gertrude had assured Lester that she would take care of his daughters as if they were her own until he returned for just $20 a week. After the July 4th holiday, Sylvia and Jenny moved into Gertrude's home at 3850 East New York Street, while their father and later their mother went to the East Coast with a carnival. Gertrude was set to be paid the weekly boarding fees of $20 to take care of the sisters until they returned in November that year. During the initial weeks of their stay at the Banaszewski household, Sylvia and Jenny had no reasons to be concerned and seemingly enjoyed their time. They sang along to pop records with Stephanie and willingly did housework at Gertrude's home. Additionally, both sisters regularly attended Sunday school with the Banaszewski children like they were really a part of the family. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for problems to come along and completely turn this happy arrangement into one that would go down in history as the most disturbing crime in American history. After agreeing to pay Gertrude Banaszewski the $20 a week for the care of Sylvia and Jenny, Lester Likens' payments were not consistently arriving on the time and were sometimes a day or two late. In response, Gertrude began to take out her frustration on the sisters by physically punishing them with various instruments, such as a paddle, making statements such as, "Well, I took care of you two little bees for a week for nothing." The abuse that Sylvia and Jenny Likens were subjected to by Gertrude Banaszewski, and also her children who she encouraged to take part, was both physical and psychological. Gertrude would continue to use various instruments to beat the sisters, such as the 1/4-inch thick paddle, a belt, and a switch from a tree. The beatings were often arbitrary, with Gertrude accusing the sisters of not doing their chores or of being disrespectful. For example, on one occasion, both girls were beaten approximately 15 times each on the back with the paddle, after Paula had accused the sisters of eating too much food at a church supper the household children had attended. In addition to the physical abuse, Gertrude also subjected Sylvia to psychological abuse. For example, Gertrude would often force Sylvia to eat leftovers or spoiled food out of garbage cans as a form of punishment for not completing her chores or for other perceived misbehavior. On one occasion, Sylvia was falsely accused of stealing candy that she had actually purchased. Gertrude also spread rumors that Sylvia was pregnant and physically assaulted her when she denied it. As the abuse continued, Gertrude began to focus almost exclusively on Sylvia, likely driven by jealousy of her youth, appearance, respectability, and potential. Gertrude would often compare Sylvia unfavorably to her own daughters and would subject her to humiliation and degradation. For example, on one occasion, Gertrude forced Sylvia to eat a hot dog overloaded with condiments, including mustard, ketchup, and spices, which resulted in her vomiting and being forced to consume her own vomit. Sylvia's only act of retaliation was spreading a rumor that Gertrude's daughters, Stephanie and Paula, were selling their bodies, which resulted in her being attacked by Stephanie's boyfriend, Coy Randolph Hubbard. The rumor was not true, and when Stephanie's boyfriend heard of it, he brutally attacked Sylvia, slapping her, banging her head against the wall, and flipping her backwards onto the floor. When Gertrude found out what had happened, she did not intervene to protect Sylvia, and instead, she continued to abuse. Coy Hubbard, along with several of his classmates who were all children from the local area, would often visit Gertrude's home to physically and verbally abuse Sylvia Likens. Gertrude would actively encourage them to do so, and these neighborhood children would routinely beat Likens, sometimes using her as a practice dummy in violent judo sessions, causing lacerations on her body, burning her skin with lit cigarettes more than 100 times, and severely injuring her genitals. To entertain Gertrude and her teenage accomplices, Sylvia was forced to strip naked in the family living room and do unspeakable things with a glass Pepsi-Cola bottle in their presence, with Gertrude stating that this act of humiliation was for Sylvia to prove to Jenny what kind of a girl you are. Gertrude eventually forbade Sylvia from attending school after she confessed to stealing a gym suit from school, as Gertrude had refused to purchase the clothing for her. For this act of theft, Gertrude whipped Likens with a 3-inch wide police belt. Gertrude then switched the conversation to the evils of premarital sex before repeatedly kicking Likens in the genitals as Stephanie, Gertrude's daughter, came to Likens' defense, shouting she didn't do anything. But it didn't stop her, and Gertrude then burned Sylvia's fingertips with matches before further whipping her. A few days later, Gertrude repeatedly whipped Jenny with a police belt after she reportedly stole a single tennis shoe from the school to wear on her strong foot. The Likens siblings, Jenny and Sylvia, were facing a difficult situation of the worst kind of abuse and neglect at the hands of their caregiver, Gertrude Banaszewski. They were hesitant to tell anyone about it, as they feared that it would only make their situation worse. Jenny, in particular, was threatened by Gertrude that if she told anyone about the abuse, she would be subjected to the same abuse and torture as her sister. The sisters were also bullied and ridiculed by other children in their neighborhood, especially when they mentioned Sylvia's situation. Their parents, Lester and Elizabeth Likens, would occasionally visit them when their travel schedule allowed. However, during their last visit on October 5th, the girls did not show any visible signs of distress, as they were in the presence of Gertrude and her children. As soon as their parents left, Gertrude turned to Sylvia and said, "What are you going to do now, Sylvia? Now they're gone." In September, the sisters met with their older sister, Diana Shoemaker, at a local park and told her about the abuse they were facing, but did not mention the address where they were living. Initially, Diana thought that her sisters were exaggerating the extent of the mistreatment they were enduring. A few weeks before this encounter, Sylvia and Jenny had met Diana in the park while in the company of 11-year-old Marie Banaszewski. During this encounter, Sylvia was given a sandwich to eat when she told her sister she was hungry. However, Sylvia did not mention this to anyone, and Marie only revealed it to her family in late September. As a result, Gertrude accused Sylvia of being gluttonous and, along with Paula, choked and bludgeoned her. They then forced Sylvia to take a scalding bath in an attempt to cleanse her of sin. Gertrude would hold Sylvia's hair and bang her head against the bath to revive her when she fainted. A neighbor anonymously reported to Sylvia's school that a girl with open sores all over her body was living at the Banaszewski household. The school sent a nurse to investigate, but Gertrude lied and said that Sylvia had run away and she didn't know where she was. Gertrude also said that Sylvia was out of control and that her sores were due to her not maintaining good hygiene. The school did not do any further investigation. Two of the Banaszewski's neighbors, Raymond and Phyllis Vermillion, had visited the house twice while the girls were under Gertrude's care. Both times they saw Paula physically abuse Sylvia and boast about it to them. Despite this, they did not report the abuse to the authorities. On or around October 1st, Diana went to the Banaszewski's house to try to see her sisters, but Gertrude refused and said she had permission from the girls' parents not to let them see her. 2 weeks later, Diana ran into Jenny and asked about Sylvia's well-being, but Jenny said she couldn't tell her or she would get into trouble. As the frequency and severity of the abuse increased, Sylvia gradually became incontinent. She was not allowed to use the bathroom and was punished for her incontinence by being thrown into the basement and tied up. There, she was often kept naked, given little food or water, and was occasionally tied to the railing of the basement stairs with her feet barely touching the ground. In the weeks leading up to being locked in the basement, Gertrude had been escalating her abuse of Sylvia. She would forcefully tell the children in her household that Sylvia had been insulting them in order to provoke them into mistreating her. On one occasion, Gertrude held a knife and told Sylvia to fight back, but Sylvia replied that she didn't know how to fight. Gertrude then cut her leg as a punishment. Neighborhood children were also allowed to pay 5 cents to come and see Sylvia and participate in the abuse, including burning and mutilating her. Throughout her captivity in the basement, Gertrude, with the help of her children and other neighborhood children, would often restrain and gag Sylvia before putting her in a bathtub filled with scalding water and rubbing salt into her wounds. Typically, I don't give my opinions, but I have to say that Gertrude truly was the most twisted woman I have ever heard of. To actually profit off of children by having them pay to take part in the torture of another child is honestly the worst thing I have ever heard of. On another occasion, Gertrude and her 12-year-old son, John Jr., forced Sylvia to ingest urine and feces from Gertrude's 1-year-old son's diaper, before then denying her any water for the remainder of the day. On October 22nd, John Jr. cruelly teased Sylvia by offering her a bowl of soup, only to take it away